Thank you everyone for joining us today on our LampLighter series. This is a program we started and will continue to do with entrepreneurs and I guess what you'd call lamplighters in the community, people doing starting companies, founders, and also people doing things to spark the community in the startup world. My name is Jeremy Fojut. I'm the co-founder of NEWaukee. I'm joined by my co-host, Amanda. You want to say hi, Amanda?
Hello.
And we'll run this kind of like a roundtable discussion. So at any point, as anybody in the audience has questions, feel free to also participate in the program. I want to thank Ginger Lazovik at Shorewest Realty and North Shore Bank for making these programs happen in a time when we all need to connect to community. So I'm going to welcome Andrew to the show here. So Andrew, why don't you say hi and tell everybody what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. My name's Andrew Verboncouer. I am the partner and CEO over at Headway and also the president of Digital Fertilizer, which is a startup community in Northeast Wisconsin.
And a little twist for this one, we brought in Andrew's really good friend, Kris, here to embarrass him and tell us all the stories that
Yes.
Andrew didn't want to tell us. So Kris will actually be a special guest interview. Kris, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Absolutely. Like I said, I've been waiting for this moment for years to just unleash. No, my name is Kris Eul. I'm the co-founder of Klink. We are the platform for professionals to get introduced. So through one-on-ones, through other virtual events that are hosted throughout the community, we help connect professionals based on interests and desired outcomes.
Excellent. Thanks, Kris.
Yeah.
So Andrew, we'll let you kick it off here. Why don't you take us back to kind of before you started your company and what made you decide to do it and kind of all the lead up before you started it?
Yeah, so I guess just thinking back to, I went to school for business and we'll take us back that far to school for business at Winona State and self-taught design. So I started actually freelancing design early on while I went to school for business and started to see opportunities, as technology opened up, as the ease of use of new tools and technology opened up to create, startups, what we call startups now. But thinking back along the journey, there's been a lot of companies. Actually, Kris and I, going that far back, started our first company together. There's ones that we've sold. There are ones that have failed miserably. We spent 2 hours in our respective basement, or 2 years rather, in our respective basements working on an idea we thought was going to impact the world and it would be great and we'd all ride off into the sunset on yachts or, whatever success story looks like to you. And so along that journey, that was like 2008, 2009 when we started our first startup, and it failed pretty miserably, but we learned a lot from that, right? And so we took those learnings, applied them to other endeavors, and kind of around the time of 2011-12, the lean startup came up and started really turning product development on its head and focusing more on customer development. So how do you validate a market first? How do you gain interest? How do you understand changing behavior? All along the way, my brother and I were working together as an agency, just he and I, and started serving customers that were building applications and taking some of that mindset in. And we did a lot of different things back in the day. We did actually social media that Kris was involved in. Again, you'll see the threads continue here between Kris and I. We offered social media management campaigns. We offered social walls. We did some work with like Axe body spray to create social walls and bring up, the walls that you see that might be tag boards now, some of those first early stage ones. But really, did a lot of freelance, did a lot of work for customers, helping bring their new ideas, have founded 5 or 6 startups along the way. As I mentioned, some that failed, some that are continuing on. And when we started Headway, specifically the company that I'm focusing on now, is we thought there was a better way for agencies and people to work with startups and corporate innovation teams. And so we took the learnings, our team is very veteran in startups, CTOs of startups have helped raise millions of dollars of funding, have helped bring new products to market. And so when we started Headway, we wanted to be the guide we wish we had when we were starting that first venture, in 2008, 2009, when we were looking at, what are all the things that could go wrong that we didn't know. And so now when we go into conversations. It's really about, what are the blind spots? What are the pitfalls? What do you need to consider along the journey of starting a new company that's built on software or not? It doesn't have to be software, but really, like, how do you get buy-in from people? How do you solve the right problem the right way that you can start gaining traction on? And so
Okay,
that
Kris,
was kind of the catalyst.
Kris, tell
for
us the real
to,
story now.
Okay, so that was all great, Andrew, but let me tell you what really happened. No, I think I mean that's spot on. We 12 years ago, right, when we started our first company, it was we didn't know anybody else that was doing this in the area. We just kind of came up with an idea, and it was a t-shirt company of all things. And we were a couple of broke college kids, and we were being advertised to and marketed to by the this is going to date us, by the Abercrombies and the American Eagles of the world, where it was like $40-$50 a shirt. It's like, we can't afford that. Like, we're happy to pay our tuition and make sure we have enough for meals every day. So like Andrew said, there were some, we've had the highest of highs, we've had the lowest of lows, but the most important thing is we've learned a lot. And that's also what's led to a lot of the impact we've been able to create both together and individually over the last 2 years.
When you were getting started, did you have in mind that you wanted to be like an entrepreneur? Does that make sense? Like, were you interested in entrepreneurship, or was it more that you started like selling stuff and all of a sudden you had a business?
I think it was probably both, right? It was like, hey, like, I need this thing to maybe make some money, as a broke college kid, but also like my major in school was business admin, because I didn't know where I wanted to focus, whether that was the marketing, the finance side, the sales side, or anything like that. So really, I knew I wanted to control my destiny, and that, early on, like, if there was something I wanted to do, it was up to me. Like, it wasn't going to be given to me based on majors. So I think I was really attracted to entrepreneurship, and that you could use creativity and like understand, like, have a strategy and a vision. But then, the big part of entrepreneurship is follow through. So like, establish a vision and then be able to create the tactics and the plan to get there. And that, I think, is really exciting to me, and what really drew me to, after those first couple of failures that we had of building things. First one was a t-shirt company. The next one was actually a nightlife app called 920 that would basically bring all the bars together, events, all of, everything in the 920, and like pull in their feeds and promote events and all of that. That's the one we spent about a year and a half building. We had a large launch party for it. Everyone was throwing high fives. And then, we looked at the traffic the next day, and we had maybe 2 people of the few hundred that signed up. Oh, we'll give it a week, and we didn't really have much traction. That one hurt, definitely more. But for me, it was more about the ability to control, with your work ethic, with how smart you worked, what you could do, where you could go.
Yeah, and Andrew, I mean, if we're really telling the truth here, if our first venture was t-shirts, I think it might have even been back in high school, right? Because so in high school, and this is now I'm glad I'm here. Now I'm glad you guys invited me here, because in high school what we actually did was this is pre-YouTube, so again, dating ourselves even further. But 2002, 2003, I don't know how this came about or why we even thought this is a good idea, but made a couple dollars off of it. We actually took, this is when webcams first came out for computers, and you actually had to attach it to the top of your computer. Again, that's how archaic it was. But we actually sold burned CDs of Andrew and I lip syncing to songs. And I can still remember $4 a CD. I mean, I could go to school that day, not have any lunch money, sell a couple CDs, and I was sitting great by noon. Like, it was fantastic. But we put up signs near the water fountains or bubblers, as you like to call it. But yeah, I mean, I think I also grew up on small business. My parents owned a couple of different restaurants while I was growing up. So take that upbringing, that background, along with meeting Andrew and becoming good friends, and being one of the very, very few out of my group that would actually go on these journeys of ideating new concepts and actually putting some action behind it. And after we sold off our first company, which was a t-shirt company, I think it paid for like 3 months worth of rent, when I was there. And I was in Milwaukee for a time, for about 10 years. I went to school at UWM. So I lived right off of Brady Street for a while, and then also lived in the Third Ward. So I think when we sold off the t-shirt company and paid for a couple months of rent, and that was kind of the pivotal moment for me. It's like, hey, we can create something, we can create a value, and let's go do it. Let's go move on to the next thing.
Andrew, just a personal note, 13 years ago, I created a website called Milwaukee Drinks, which was the same kind of concept where you'd click on like wings and it would filter through all the wings specials in the city, with some really, I guess, pretty design, but functionality not the best. But I did actually buy 25 cities domains, like their city drinks, and was able to actually sell a lot of those domains to other people that were looking to fail at their local drinking establishment website too.
The benefit to that, right, is that you go to every bar and they know you, but that's also the curse. So, hey, let's take a shot. And you're like,
yeah, totally.
Every night's a bar crawl.
Yeah, all your clients are at bars. It's just like, there's really no way out of that besides just letting the company fall and crash and burn. Let's talk a little bit more about crashing and burning. Like, what are some of these things that didn't work out? Why do you think they didn't work out? And then or maybe they just kind of place in time. Can you guys talk both about these things that what you actually took away from the things that didn't work out that made you successful today?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down, and there's research on this. I could link it after this, but like a lot of it comes down to timing, right? Like, hey, you can have a vision that outpaces the market's comfort level. You could outpace, or set a vision too big, or something that you can't really change behavior because nobody's doing it today. You're trying to create a new behavior, right? And that's, I think, is the result of, having something launched too soon. The reality of it is, for that first one, the bar one that you mentioned, we spent a lot of time building and not a lot of time talking or trying to sell. Versus like today at Headway, we build prototypes in a matter of a week or two, and we try to sell using those prototypes before we build a product. If we took that mindset back then, we'd be able to tell really, really quickly, like, hey, nobody wants this. Right? Let's not spend any time building this. Let's show them the vision, right, in tangible form, something clickable. It seems real enough to suspend disbelief that it's a real thing. So I think that's one thing, is like, how much can you learn versus what you can ship. And so I think that's a big learning that's gone into a lot of what we're doing at Headway, using the lean startup, using lean UX, really figuring out like, what's our goal, how are we trying to get there, and how do we measure learning versus shipping a bunch of stuff, a bunch of work. How do we get to outcomes and not output, essentially?
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that we went into it, very, very blindly, and the fact of we learned by doing, and we didn't have mentors, we didn't have other people that we knew that were launching companies or businesses or products or anything. So we kind of just went to it full-fledged, and whatever came out of it, we just kind of reacted to it. So I think over the years, we've obviously had a lot of different experiences, a lot of learning opportunities to say, hey, if we would do things differently, here's how we'd approach it. And it's much more methodical and systemic in the fact of just the process and the procedure in place of how do you take a concept, how do you validate it, like Andrew said, just spending more time with customers, and really learning what the problem actually is versus what you think the problem may be. I think there's a key difference there that if I look at one or two of some of our ventures could have been like the core root of the early death of it.
Totally. Andrew, I want to bounce to Civically a second, and then we'll come back to this. You're also we're behind Digital Fertilizer in Green Bay area. Tell us about that. Like, is it important for entrepreneurs to be so civically engaged too?
I mean, I think it is. I think there's a balance you need to strike between, like, locally, obviously there's Startup Green Bay, or there's Startup Wisconsin Week, there's Digital Fertilizer. We hold a lot of other events, outside of Digital Fertilizer. I can talk about that a little bit. but like Wisconsin UX, so just for designers, learning design, entrepreneurs come there. How do you think about customer problems? How do you think about setting up, systems thinking across your team, development as well. But Digital Fertilizer is really about helping people share their ideas and their experiences that can spark new ideas and experiences. And the side effect of that is that we get people that are either looking to join startups out of that are looking to form a core group. We get investors that are looking for deal flow. And I think from a Civic standpoint, everything, it's hard. It's like the chicken and the egg problem, right? Where, hey, we have ideas but not capital, or we have capital but no ideas, or we have ideas but not the right ones, right? So I think it's like trying to use community and networks to help people like self-govern, like, hey, we need capital, we need ideas, we need education, we need all of these things to come together. And through Digital Fertilizer, we're really trying to give people a platform to meet online, or to meet in person. And then now we're also looking for opportunities to meet online, obviously given the state of the world, in that, remote work is more possible than a lot of companies thought, and people are shutting down their offices. So I think from a Civic standpoint, is trying to support like the communities that you're in and figure out how to work with, like we work a lot with the chamber. We have an event coming up next month called Tech Connect. So trying to work with other organizations inside, our local demographic and local geography to help like bring entrepreneurs to the capital, or bring entrepreneurs to the companies looking for tech or looking for founders.
I probably should ask you explain Digital Fertilizer to the audience first.
Yeah,
why don't you do that, and then people kind of get what you're talking about.
So Digital Fertilizer is we're a startup community in Northeast Wisconsin that our goal is to connect, engage, and empower the high growth, high tech startup ecosystem. So that's bringing in, events that bring in entrepreneurs, that bring in designers, developers, that bring in, capital. So we have panels and stuff from time to time from VCs and angels that can get feedback. We have, as I mentioned, coming up a reverse pitch, but really events that can help shine a spotlight on things that are going on inside of the community. People can share their stories. Like a lot of people, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, start in Green Bay, they move to Silicon Valley, they have an exit, they move back, right, for family reasons. Or some of them build a company right in Green Bay. So why are all the reasons why they failed, or why are all the reasons why they succeeded, and how can they use the network and the people to build their company locally, even if part of their team is remote? What are the resources and things like that. So for us, it's about bringing entrepreneurs and people that are entrepreneurial together.
Awesome. I do want to we have a question from the audience. Kris, if you want to come on camera and ask the question you asked to the chat, so we can make it a little bit more interactive here.
Maybe could we start with Amber's? Because I think that's probably the closest to the
Amber
Digital Fertilizer.
The camera right now.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Amber. I called you out on accident.
But we can answer Amber's next.
Hi, everyone. I'm also Kris. Kris, you mentioned going through problems that you thought would be a problem versus actually were problems. And I remember listening to something on the founders of Airbnb talking about how they thought it was like the digital aspect or the website. But when they actually went into the homes, they realized it was like the positioning of the cameras, or how the homes actually looked or presented. So when you talked about that, how did you create feedback to learn what the problem was versus what you thought it could be?
Yeah, awesome question. So, I just started going through this 8 weeks ago, and the evolution of Klink, right, really came to fruition when everything with the pandemic occurred, and our world created this new norm of virtual online events and video conferencing in particular. So when we first started Klink, and again, this was 2 months ago, this has been an idea that Andrew and I have had for years, right? How do we use the networking effect to allow people to be introduced to one another based on interests and desired outcomes, versus a lot of the existing platforms that are out there today that focus on connecting people with others that they already know and that they've already met. How do we help expand that network, that we can help align people, based on their profession and their interests? Mm-hmm. And so when we first started thinking about, okay, so how do we actually put this into action? What does that look like? what we did was say, hey, because we're sheltering in place, because of social distancing, people are going to want to be able to use video conferencing more. They're going to want to be able to see and have this added element of the additional sense that audio doesn't provide. So we actually looked at Klink as a way of, managing and scheduling all of your video conferencing, all of your video conferencing meetings. So as we set up a landing page and started getting people signing up, I had a video call with each person that signed up. We formed those people that signed up into a private beta group, and I sat and I talked with every single one, about 100 people, and we figured out that the real issue actually was that people felt like they wanted to connect, or people wanted a platform to connect and network with other industry professionals, and not necessarily a place to manage their video calls or their video conferencing meetings. And so that was a real aha moment for us, that it's like, yeah, video is one of the things, but the bigger issue is the fact that people aren't able to feel like, or people aren't able to have a network or a place where they can actually network with their peers. And in virtual events was either, second or third on the list. It was much further down than the main priority. So with that, it led us to plan to discover, as we say, in identifying the true problem and really get to the heart of what people were looking for.
I think, part of that, Kris, is trying to figure out, how do you replicate the outcome of your product before you build it? So like, what can you do manually via spreadsheets or email, or like, how do you, back to that, what I said earlier around, how do you change someone's behavior, and can you do that in the, lowest friction way? Is that a call? Is that an email? Is that, something that would mimic what the outcome is, what value you're creating? In this case with Klink, as Kris mentioned, it's connecting two unknown people together to, around their common interests. Like, if you can do that and prove out the mechanics of it and like get feedback from that, then you can learn more about like what you should build and, how you should pivot. I think in Airbnb's case, it'd be interesting to see behind, how they went about figuring out that it wasn't the site and it wasn't the actual homes, but it was the, the photos. And you actually had them on, one of their growth managers on our podcast a couple of years back, and they, their site is only 7 pages, and they have, dozens and dozens of growth experiments running at any time. So it'd be interesting to see how they paired. Like, did they just use the same listing and split test images, between the two, or like a myriad of those to realize that was it?
That they were traveling to different people, the different users that they had. They went to their homes and we're kind of talking to them, like, why do they think where the issues were arising? And then they kind of, like what you guys did, they took like the actual customer feedback and then kind of created the feedback or the issues that they thought were rising. And then that's kind of how they came to that conclusion. I heard it on Guy Raz. It's How I Built This. So that's where they really got in depth about it. And I was like, that's really interesting, because we create all these outcomes in our head, but oftentimes they're different than the reality of the outcomes.
Right.
Yeah, and a big thing that that I've learned over the years, and that Andrew's helped me learn and realize too, is start with the problem and not necessarily the solution, right? So identify the problem and make sure that it is an actual problem and not one that you were thinking that is an issue, but it's something that you're hearing from your customers, and then go from there around building the solution to that issue.
Gotcha.
Because we had a question earlier from Amanda, or sorry, was that Amber, around how integrated you are with the Milwaukee Tech Hub. Obviously, you guys are in Green Bay, but I guess the further that question is, how connected are you guys into the ecosystem of the state, and how important do you think that is, and what can we do to make it better, I guess? So if I'll enhance Amanda's or Amber's question here a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we're, we started Digital Fertilizer actually by way of going to startup MKE events, right? And like meeting Matt Cordio, and we're pretty close with him. And so now we run Green Bay Startup Green Bay Week. Headway was a sponsor of Startup Wisconsin Week. We've built the site, the calendar, all of that. So if you have feedback, definitely send it. But we're trying to get more connected. And I think, there are events where we've done, between Green Bay and Appleton, or Green Bay and Oshkosh, and we're trying to figure out a way to combine the weeks. Actually, for this upcoming Startup Week, which might look different, it's always in November, might look different, with COVID-19 happening. But I think there's better ways for us to not only connect in person, right? Because from Green Bay to Milwaukee, it's about 2 hours. how do we hold more events like this that are remote and then augment those with physical events? And, I think, I still think there's a big opportunity there, but we're pretty close, with a lot of, what's going on in Milwaukee, just by way of Startup Milwaukee and Matt Cordio and what he's doing there. And obviously here in, with NEWaukee.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that too, I mean, this is one of the things that we're hoping to aid and support as far as a collective ecosystem within the startup scene and professional scene with Klink. So a lot of my time over the last couple of months, I've been talking with not only Matt over at Startup MKE, but then also to like Jeff Sherman on Milwaukee or Lyft, and Brian Thompson, who is the UWM, Lubar School of Business Entrepreneurship Center director, and Dean Chari, who is the UWM School of Business dean, about something like this, because it takes a collective effort, right? It takes the digital fertilizers and startup MKEs and NEWaukes of the world, but it also takes the supporting universities, the companies, the corporations nearby, the chambers, as Andrew said, with Green Bay and Milwaukee and Madison. We're also talking with Generator and how do we build a more cohesive ecosystem between all these different entities, so that it's not necessarily a zero-sum game, meaning that each community is kind of like not necessarily out for themselves, but just kind of focused on their one community, but it's a very much more collective and collaborative environment.
Awesome. So I have another question here. I'm going to have Gori go on. You can ask that question live if you want. Maybe he must unmute himself. Okay, well, we'll pause on that one, and I'll go back to one of mine. Kris, I want to kind of grill Andrew here. Can you tell us about, two things? What are his great leadership skills in the startup world, and for his, for employees and things like that? What have you observed over working with him so much that you're impressed by? And then give us the stuff that he needs to improve on.
Just well, the ladder's going to take too long. We only have another half hour. But, no, obviously Andrew and I have a lot of history, and it wouldn't be that case if he's got he's full of integrity. He's I think the best way to put it is he always follows through, right? He does what he says he's going to do, and he's willing to, again, 12 years ago, when we had the idea of starting a t-shirt company to help, a couple of kids from Green Bay, right, to help combat the Abercrombies and American Eagles of the world of overpriced t-shirts, decided to go on that venture together. So it's, he's willing to take those risks and always follows through. And it speaks volumes that a lot of, his abilities and his skill sets that he has today have primarily been self-taught. So he takes on himself to, do what he needs to do to do things right. And, that's someone that I can certainly get behind.
Awesome. What about, if you guys want to tell us a story that maybe about your startup and entrepreneurship past and maybe even present of something that maybe most people don't know, like just kind of maybe a funny story, a crazy story, a story of like resilience, or like I can't believe we did that, or something that would kind of spark interest of people in the crowd that maybe are aspiring entrepreneurs or have went through that same thing. I think a lot of times, I mean, you guys are very close, but sometimes entrepreneurs don't have another peer entrepreneur to go through that same grind with, which could be super isolating and difficult sometimes. So anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I can go first. So this is about Headway, and I don't know if anyone, many people know this story outside of Headway. I see Jacob from our teams on the call, but like early on, we started Headway with a vision for an impact we wanted to make, how we wanted to work with companies, right? This special ops startup, product team for hire that would be able to help people. And about a year in, we were we'd hired somebody for sales. We were struggling really to make, to get new contracts and to find our place in the market and how we could help. And, we had one of our partners leave Headway. Ultimately ended up going to one of our client partners. And then we had to fire like the first person that was on our team, one of the other person. We were a team of 4 at the time. Then we had 3 partners and one developer on board with us. And we really that night we got together at my brother's, one of our partners at Headway. We got together in his basement with the other partner, John. And it was like a come to Jesus moment. Like, hey, if now's the time where anyone's out, like there's really nowhere else to go from here. Like, we could shut the doors, it could be, we could look back at this and, hey, I remember I had a startup once, or, hey, we had this company, or we can kind of battle back out of the ashes, right, and start just crawling out, because that's where we're at. We had about actually 2 weeks of runway in the bank left. And, it was a pivotal moment for us of kind of looking each other in the eye and saying like, yeah, like we're dedicated to, to do this, and we're gonna persist through this. And so we started making a plan of like, hey, what happens? Well, hey, let's cut our salaries if we need to. Let's do this, right? We only had one employee at the time who was on the crew besides the partners. And kind of between then and now, we're a team of 30. We're working with teams. At that time we worked with a lot of startups. Now we're working with startups and corporate innovation teams. We do a lot of work in financial technology. We do a lot of work in healthcare, logistics, supply chain, working with companies, Chase Bank, working with, so I guess my advice to people that if you're through that stage where you're like, how could this get any worse? How can you make it better? Like how do you put a plan in place to say like, hey, tomorrow, like this is my only goal, and this is going to get us traction to starting to dig out. And, it's important to have that long-term vision for impact, but when it comes down to it, like, what are you going to do today to change that? And how do you know, right? What success looks like for you today or this week, and just setting those small milestones so that you can start digging out. Because, if you were to tell me back then that we were, hey, we're going to have a big team of 30 and we're looking at, expanding more, and we're nationwide and we have remote team members everywhere, I'd be like, hey, that sounds like a great Cinderella story. But like, what should I do today? You know what I mean? So I think that's one that, I look back at with kind of, proud about how our team handled it, and like how we wanted to exist moving forward, and how our partners, all collectively rose to the challenge and really just did whatever it took to start gaining more momentum.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really stands out for me that was just like an epic failure, but also a really big learning opportunity was, again, back to the coveted bar nightlife business. We actually went to a bars owner association meeting in Appleton, and the whole thing was like, how do you go from individuals to gathering the masses? And so we went to this meeting, and again, we were like 20, I don't know, 22. I look like I'm 14 at the time, and we're basically presenting this idea of 920 and how it can be like be a social site, and you can list all of your specials, and we can help create events around your weekend festivities and all those good things. And so we get down with this pitch to all these different bar owners, and we have this clipboard that, hey, sign up, send your name and your email, and we'll follow up with you, and we'll make sure you get all the details, and we'll get you signed up and put on our site. The clipboard gets passed around, gets back to us, 0 signatures, 0 signatures whatsoever. And so there were like 30 owners, 0 signatures. And that was one of those things where we kind of looked at each other like, well, that didn't work. But
about 10
10
minutes prior to that, the inside juice, the seasoned entrepreneurs we were, being so buttoned up, we forgot a notepad. So there,
Yeah.
Kris and I were sprinting 5 blocks down the street to the nearest Walgreens to buy a pack of pens, to buy a 5-rule binder or whatever it was, and then get back. And I think actually at that time when we were pitching, the smoking ban was put in.
Yes.
So everyone was up in arms, and then we got to take the floor once they delivered that news. So that was fun.
Yeah.
I want to open it up a little bit to questions here. If you have a question, you can come unmute yourself, put your video on. You can ask those questions. If you don't want to, I can read them from the chat here. I'll give it a second. I think Kris, you had one.
Yeah. Do you guys think a startup is closer to a sports team or a family?
I would say sorry, Andrew, I didn't know
Go
if I
ahead.
cut you off there. This is usually what happens. Now you're getting the real stuff. Andrew and I have our weekly calls, and this is usually what happens. But anyways, I think it's much more of a sports team. It's performance based. It's you have to come in and put your best foot forward, and you have to get the work done. It's results driven. I've seen a number of businesses, both small and large corporations, right, that are ran by family members that can add to a lot of the dysfunction or disorganization within that company. So I would say that it's closer to a sports team because of that performance based than it is a family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say a sports team for sure. And we, think about this as we create our product teams, like defining roles, setting expectations, all that's really important. Not what are we doing, but how are we doing it together? How are we as people? So I think you're bringing, like, it's closer to a sports team in that it should be more architected. You should be clearer around where the lines of separation are, or if there aren't any, right? That should be an expectation set too. You bring in those family elements of, you got to build empathy for people. You have to understand that, not everyone is going to be able to pin it all the time. And there's stuff going outside of startups that when we show up, we're bringing our whole selves to it, not just like what I can do as a skill. And so, it's almost like when you're setting expectations with your team, let's say a football team stepped up to the plate and said, all right, we're going to run a pass play, ready, break. And what the outcome is, you want to run a pass play, but who's doing what? Is there timing that's considered? Do we have a read on the safety? And I kind of lean back to that. One part of my history that didn't come up is I used to play pro indoor football here in Green Bay and had a bunch of NFL tryouts. And that was my number one passion kind of as building startups. I would work out in the morning but I draw a lot of my kind of how teams should work together and how we should cover for one another and really be that team. It is a sports team, you can have family aspects to it. But at the same time, it's all about setting expectations. So if you're in a relationship with you have a wife or a spouse or whatever that looks like if you don't set expectations with each other, it's not going to go well because you're not going to be on the same page. So more like a sports team, but bring the aspects of family that bring the human side of it of, at Headway, we do a lot, and this is inside our product teams in addition to our team, personality type assessments, the stuff that we can learn, hey, what are you expecting of each person? Maybe you went really in depth. And so you created this report that has 17 slides and you present it to the team, but really 5 members on the team only cared about the outcome and they trusted you with the rest. How do we give the right level of, and the appropriate level of feedback, the appropriate level of information and insight into what's going on as a team. And I think part of that is understanding, who we are as people beyond the skills. And then, as Kris mentioned, hey, we need to perform still, but we need to kind of have that caveat that things will happen, things will come up and yeah.
I want to add to that. So my company is called Newance, and Newance works specifically around talent. So hiring people, retaining people, growing people. And I would say most of the startups we work with who have kicked off with that phrase, we're a family, later come to need to outgrow it somehow. And it's almost worse to start with that because frankly, that phrase just sort of implies an unconditional love that, maybe the love is unconditional, but the place on the team is not unconditional. And so I really like this question, but I hope for anybody on the call who's thinking of building a team, set to Andrew's point about setting expectations, that language can get really tricky really fast.
Yeah, I like the point where it's really setting boundaries from the start. It's just kind of understanding the different roles. But I know, Andrew, you mentioned working with your brother. So does that line get mixed between business and family from time to time?
It used to a lot. I mean, now it doesn't. The curveball in this is that we also married sisters. And so there's no escaping, pre-COVID, obviously when we hung out more. But yeah, it doesn't really get blurred. I mean, we kind of have this thing and for any founders that are out there, Headway runs on EOS, which is an entrepreneurial operating system. It gives you 6 key components. For us, there's like this concept of like in the business, what's your title and what's your role and how are you contributing? And then there's like this concept of the owner's box, right? Like the owner's box is a lot different. And I think when we separated those two of like, hey, in the company, here's my role, here's what it looks like on the accountability chart, here's what I'm responsible for. And then like as an owner, I get say in certain decisions, like those two shouldn't be blurred. So it's like carving out time to be able to work in the business and then like be an owner of the business and have some other decisions. Because one thing that, we fell into early just across all partners is like, hey, we're all different roles on the accountability chart and not all as team facing, or they're not all as, client facing. Like, how do we make sure that we're on the same page and we're not, I guess, adding confusion? And for us, like the separation of leadership team in the company and ownership team outside of the company is something different that has helped us.
I just want to say, Amanda, I thought we were family. So I know we're business partners, but I really
totally
thought
offended.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm going to end this interview now. So we're going to have a little family quarrel here. There was another question from, I believe it's Gory from the audience. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So my question is basically from both the aspects, your previous ventures and the current one, Headway and Klink. And like the lean startup book, the methodology, and I've came across this dilemma that entrepreneurs usually face, which is persevere and pivot. So did you decided in those previous ones that it's not going to work and you should shut it out? And how do you do it currently also at Headway and all that? When do you decide that, or how does it work? Can you just tell me a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it looks different for a startup that's standalone than it does, let's say, a corporate innovation team that's trying to create a new revenue stream. As a startup, actually with the nightlife thing that Kris and I started a while back, we actually started doing bar crawls. And like that could have been very lucrative, right? We could have pivoted to just bar crawls and had, an event site and an event community around that. But we decided like that wasn't for us. So I think part of it is like, as you're getting feedback from users and as you're seeing how they interact and what are they voting with either with their time or with their money, like, is that where you want to go? Is that aligned with your company's vision? Is that aligned with your personal vision? If it is, then I think you should pivot. If it's something like, I'm trying to think of an example. Elon Musk, right, as he's starting Tesla, his choice was to persevere. There was no other option, right, regardless of what people said. And there's some good case studies out there around how he started with like customizations, high end first, and that high end really drove adoption and drove essentially the cost to create vehicles down because they went to the high end first, and that funded a lot of what they did. So I think for us, it's like, I'm trying to think of some good examples that I could give you. But persevere is like, is this truly something visionary? Are you seeing indications in behavior change that, should keep you down the path? Is it viable? Do you have funding and runway and personal grit to grind through it? And it could be part of that is the timing isn't right? Are you okay to like continue persevering on this, but know that, hey, you might have to pick this up in 6 months or a year or later. And from a pivot standpoint, I think it's just all about learning, as I mentioned, like, is this going somewhere that's aligned with your vision? Are you seeing behavior that mimics that? And if you're okay with it, your vision changing, which I think a lot of startups and companies should, that's kind of like the two choices. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, at the heart of it, you have, is there a fundamental problem that you're solving for, right? Are you starting with a problem? Are you finding a problem? Are your customers telling you it's a problem versus, you thinking that this is an issue, right? Like we were talking with Kris earlier, again, Klink started off as a way to schedule and manage your video with your video calls. And then over time, over the last few months and close to 100 different calls, we realized that there's a much greater opportunity in the fact of connecting professionals together based on those interests and desired outcomes. And so now we're seeing in our beta programs that we have a lot of co-founders that want to connect with other co-founders just as far as like a means to just vent and talk about, hey, what's working for you? What are some of the tools that you're using to hire, or talking with VCs, and how do you get ready for VC presentations, or how do you know when it's time to ask for VC money? We're seeing others too that work at young professionals that working at companies that maybe they're things like asking for a raise, or I'm thinking about another opportunity, or just even professionally benchmarking, right? Like, what are you doing that's working in your day-to-day? What should I be doing? And so, again, to Andrew's point, it's like, how do you really get down to the core of it and know that if you're trying to figure out, do I pivot or persevere, are you getting feedback from your end users? And if so, is it aligned with the greater problem? And if it's not, then that's the decision you have to make, is do I pivot, or do I try to continue on this journey of, getting answers to this issue I think that's occurring?
Yeah, one thing that's very I think some of our feedback is a little bit subjective, but one thing that's very objective. So we use the pirate model of startup metrics. It kind of is an engagement funnel. So on the top of that is awareness. The next thing is acquisition. Can you acquire someone's interest? So a lot of times when you're launching a venture, just as Lean Startup mentioned, like, put your landing page out there, like, work on the value prop, talk to people and describe what you're doing. Like, is that of interest to them? And if you can solve for kind of the acquisition standpoint, and people are interested in the value you're saying you're going to provide, that's a pretty good indication. So sometimes it might be, hey, we're solving the right problem, but we're targeting the wrong person. So let's change, what's different about this person than we thought, like, that they don't have this problem, who's like them that might have it, and how do you steer that? So hopefully that's helpful.
Kris, we want you to ask a question of Andrew. What kind of question's been burning that you don't ask him on a daily basis?
How come you never taught me how to code, man? No. No, I don't know.
What should the people know in the audience that we don't know?
What should people know in the audience? Yeah. Gosh, I don't know. I don't know, Drew.
Is there anything around, like, maybe his work habits or anything around that, like the advice he's given other people in the startup world? So often we have people that come on a lot of these startup talks, and they're looking for, maybe they want to start something and they haven't done that yet because they just don't want to take the risk of the jump.
Andrew, I'm curious, how are you so good at follow through? You've talked about follow through. Kris mentioned you're great at follow through. I think conceptually people know it's important, but it's not all that common that people are exceptional at it. What are some of your secrets?
Oh, I don't know about secrets. I think it's just getting up and doing the work. I think it's like creating a plan and a vision for where you want. And then, for me, I use a lot of the tactics from, even before Atomic Habits, like habit stacking, being able to really group things together. For me, I think a lot of the discipline came from like being the underdog and knowing, and this is kind of back to my football days, but hey, I didn't start as running back in high school till my senior year. I walked on at Winona and earned a scholarship. I tried out, as a guest to the pro indoor team I played for, and won a starting spot over running backs that had been drafted in the NFL draft earlier that year or the year before. And so I think part of that for me is knowing that if I want to get there, I need to work. And if I need to work, I need to be doing the right things. So peeling back that, hey, I want to launch a company. Well, what are all the things I need to do? Who do I need to talk to? Or, hey, we need to launch this project. I think just chopping it up into milestones, into things you can do today is going to help. I think where, and even in projects like at Headway that we kick off, the projects that don't get complete, what's the common denominator? Well, we didn't create a plan to get there. Right? Or it was on the back burner, and where it was hey, this vague place we wanted to go, but we didn't have the discipline at that point to, hey, this week, here's what we need to get done. Next week, here's what we get done, right? We didn't put those sticks and those milestones in place. So I think for me, it's all about understanding the vision and then saying what are the key groups of things we need to accomplish along the way? And then today, how do I achieve that?
Yeah, and I can, we've especially in the last, few months here as we've been building out Klink, we've actually like coined ourselves the nap time startup, because my co-founding team of Klink is actually Headway. So Andrew's been heading up a lot of the design and development work for MVP that we've done with the no code tool that he's just been blowing out of the water. But during our daughter's nap times, late at night in the wee hours of the morning, it just goes back to his follow through. And again, finding little, achievable milestones that we can say, okay, tonight we're doing this, or, by Friday, we're going to have this done, and just focus on that thing and just go. So yeah, that's been huge in getting this thing up and running and within 2 months.
Excellent. Any more questions for the audience? Otherwise, we're kind of running short on time here. Okay.
I had
Kris, another question.
Andrew, you mentioned Atomic Habit. So what are a couple books that have really influenced either what you do with startups or just kind of how you think about creating value?
Atomic Habits was definitely one of them. Essentialism was a big one for me. Really understanding like, what do I want for myself, my family. I think one of the stories in there was, he was working and he wanted, was really career focused. His wife's going into labor and he had a choice to make of going to this big client meeting or like staying next to his wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he attended the meeting, and the guy was so surprised that he actually came that was like a wake up call. He's like, I can't believe you're here. And he's like, I thought like that was the expectation for me. But so I think that's one. Let me think of some of the other. Make Time is another good one. I know those guys are down in Milwaukee now. I'm trying to think of what else. I think just like really, the big thing is like there's so many things you could do in the world with your time, with your money, your resources, your family. Like what's most important to you? And I think like essentialism gets at that. Atomic Habits, like once you know where you want to go, like that can help you create a plan and create your daily habits that get you there. Make Time, obviously. So I think for me, like a lot of them are, that. I mean, from a business book standpoint, there is like The Infinite Game, like Simon Sinek, a big fan of all of his work, and just having a long-term mindset and not like, balancing that, right? Like a long-term mindset on people, but like, hey, we also need performance. So kind of like we talked about earlier between a sport and family.
Never split the difference. Yeah, never split the difference. I know is a big one too by Chris Voss, who is a former FBI negotiator, right? How to use a lot of those tactics and tricks in a business setting. Crossing the Chasm, I think is really good too by Jeffrey Moore. There's another one, Talk Like Ted, right? So as you're presenting, whether it's in a meeting or a presentation. So
yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, guys.
And Amanda's putting all those links in the chat, so way to stay up on it. And you can, if you want to save those, you can just click on the little 3 dots there and click Save Chat, and you can download it if you want to save those links. Well, Kris and Andrew, that's kind of all the time we have today. I just want to appreciate you guys for coming on. Hope to be in person again so I can meet you guys in person. It sounds like we've had a lot of the same past in starting companies that no longer exist. But that do exist now.
and one last point of connection here. So my first job out of school at UWM was with the agency GMR, and so I was on the New Balance team. So Ian, actually, one of the founders of NEWaukee, I took his old job. So after he left, I took his job. So it kind of is coming full circle here.
Well, the other full circle is that I applied to work at GMR probably 100 times and it never hired me.
Perfect.
So there you go. That's that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So
the one other thing, sorry, that's like kind of and I was just thinking of like books that influence is The More of Less by Joshua Becker. So like it's along the same lines of essentialism, but it's really about like prioritizing. What do you want? You know what I mean? I think once you can get clear about that and your purpose, you can start making a plan to get there.
Yeah,
awesome.
That's kind of how I feel about like reading meditations. I think that kind of puts things into perspective too, because it's just like he was one of the most powerful people, if not the most powerful on earth. And just kind of to see that he reflects with the same dilemmas we do, like finding purpose, trying to make good decisions for the whole. So those are really good recommendations. But
yeah, thanks Jeremy and Amanda for
Yeah.
hosting. I appreciate it. It's great
Thanks,
chatting.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.